Hi there, and welcome, friends, to today's episode of Spiritual Beings. So, coming into the studio this morning, I felt a wonderful sense of renewal. Yesterday, I took some time off to rest and relax, and today I found myself feeling refreshed and ready to go. And as I began my day, as I usually do, lighting some candles and kind of igniting the energy that is my studio altar to help harness creativity, but also nurturing and compassion for myself as I go through the creative process. I had an interesting, it's kind of like a story for today that seemed to kind of unfold. I had set forth to modify my anatomy skull, my drawing skull reference, and I had rubber bands on it originally that I was using to help me eyeball quickly the frames of reference on the head, and I had been wanting to replace it with some sticker. And it was interesting because as I was doing this, as you can see, my skull was just everything that moved and came apart did. And I just kind of thought that was rather humorous considering it's, representational of death, which is falling apart and decay. And it was an interesting process because I normally would have an aversion to anything that has to do with the human body, like the head, the skull, anything like that kind of bugs me or irritates me. I don't know what to call it. It just basically kind of irritates me. And because I want to learn to draw the human form better and up my skill set, I realized I had to get a skull. And when I got this originally, I just kind of picked one. I didn't get a big one. I got one that I could take with me if I wanted to, I suppose. But it was funny because when I first got it, I kind of looked at it funny. And part of me was intrigued by that reaction because what I found for myself was this kind of like resistance to the idea of the finality of death, I guess. And looking at a skull only represents one thing, death. And so I've since come well past that. Looking at the skull every day and handling it, it completely unfazes me now. And in fact, I have befriended the skull. So the skull and I are good friends nowadays. But it was interesting to notice how in everyday activities and experiences and, occurrences, anything that happens in the day, I can find if I look a little bit closer or maybe take a step back in my own thought process of a situation or an experience, I can find myself having a deeper knowing of what is happening in front of me. And it's not that everything is deep, but it kind of is. I find that there is actually a little bit of meaning in the everyday of life. And it's not that it's not premonition, it's not fortune telling, it's nothing of that sort of kind of extreme representation of this like in pop culture and on TV and movies, but it's rather this ability to acknowledge that the universe is always talking to us. Each of us gets a very individualized message of a steady stream of information that is only for our personal experience. And sharing some of that can be really helpful because I think that when some people try to look at the world through a more, I want to say kind of a wider view, I suppose, because I think that people feel so, I think the way they deal with their everyday life is to focus very acutely on everything in their life. So the work is the, narrowed in focus of work, that time, that obligation, that stress, that, whatever it might be needed in that time. But it becomes a narrowed focus, which I think does help in situations, especially that are stressful or hard to deal with, it helps to block out extra distraction and information. But I think that people have done that for so long and in so much of their life in order to cope or deal, or, that's maybe a way they've conditioned themselves. They seem to perhaps forget that there's a way to widen back and stand back from life and find more in it. I think of this along lines of, I think people think of this perhaps maybe more closely in the idea of praying to God. And my personal experience throughout my life of that has been all over the place. Most of my early years up until my late 20s, I would say, I would pray and have absolutely no answer, just crickets. It took me a really long time in the sense of my percentage of life I've lived, which is most of it, to come to a point to actually see that the answers are not TV and movies. It's not going to come in a very obvious way. It may not come in a very direct way. It might, it can come in any way possible. And this is the, all ideas of God. This isn't one religion, one culture, one anything. This is just the idea of creation. This isn't even a personification of anything, a gender. It is nothing of that sort. But this is simply asking the universe for help, asking for guidance, asking for insight. And as I've paid more attention to my experience and widened my understanding of things and my own experience of the world, I've found that those answers come not from someone else out there, but rather from myself. Once I was able to embrace fully or more fully the idea of we are the creator, we are the image of the creator, and take away from all of the stigma and all of the dogma of religion and all the religious culture that I've grown up in, which was incredibly hard and painful to do, I will admit readily. But once I was able to remove myself from that predisposed notion of things and offer myself more distant space and broadened awareness, that idea of being the creator, the image of the creator, really began to take on an understanding in my actual experience. And it comes down to as simply as anything and everything you can possibly need in this world, of any questions you might have, any need you might have, it's all within yourself, because you are God, you are creator. I think of that as the most comforting form of that idea that I've ever come across. And this was an effort of reading everything I could find, dismissing what didn't work, what didn't feel right at that time, allowing old things in, but really modified or really broadened the understanding. And once that process started to take, shape in my experience, that's where I found that answer for myself. And each person will very likely have some very refined version for themselves as the individual, as far as how they understand this and how they come across it for themselves. So please, I urge you, if you've ever hated the idea of God and talking to God and praying to God and you've never been answered, broaden back, look at your experience and see if you perhaps have the answers. And there's nothing wrong with the answers being within you. So, the culmination of all that I've done has really allowed me greater peace. And that has been really the whole focus and goal of my whole life, I would say, without me knowing it until more recently, that it's really just to work towards and find that peace and to find that personal ease in anything and everything I do. And by engaging with life around me, having a garden and growing every plant I can find, and pretty much edibles or anything that I can use for my spiritual practices, which is most every plant. I find even greater amazing things. I grow seeds by accident, not intending to. Like here, this is a chili plant that accidentally fell into that pot. And this is some sweetgrass that I'm finally growing successfully. But these plants aren't just something to take care of. They're actually a part of my greater understanding of the world. They've become friends. And I kind of think of Ivy from Batman in that way. The plants are my friends, and they really, really are. I have very, I feel like it's too personal of a aspect of my practice, but there are plants that I have a particular fondness of that are definitely spirit plants for me. And they aren't hallucinogenic or anything like that. They're just plants that their essence is really tailored to my needs. And I sit and talk with them. And animals are an easy one to go for because they reciprocate. They tell you if they like you or not. It's very clear, it's very obvious, and it feels so good to be in their presence. And my little black cat, he's a lucky one. So today it is a sad, sad day that Mr. Chris Cornell's life has come to an end. I was beginning my drawing warm-up, and as I began the timer and I began, the simple practice of just getting my hand and my arm warmed up and my brain kind of flowing and focused on the practice at hand, I realized how much of this story bookend that this part of this aspect of my day was. I started off with a skull, the idea of we all fall apart one day and this is all that's left of us is bones, right? And then as I was making basic lines a little bit later on in that morning, I realized it was like I had a timer going, and then I had these lines I was drawing. And as I kept going and repeatedly drawing straight lines, just to make sure I could do them, I suppose, I realized it was kind of like its own form of art. In some regard, I like drawing geometric shapes, and I like drawing lines, and I like kind of making the chaotic out of the order, right? Lines are incredibly, linear and straight and definitive, but when you cross them, then all of a sudden it's like chaos, you're just making lines all over the place now, but they're all very rigid, but these things are chaos inherently. And I realized it was like counting the days, counting the days until the end. And this thought came to me, and all of a sudden I realized I think a lot of people live their life counting their days. And it's more about that days until you die, the days until you can rest, the days until you can relax. And it's time, it's days, anything that we count. And we put this amount on it. And I realized as I was drawing these lines, that is so sad. People live just to get through life, not to enjoy it, not to find pleasure, not to find joy, not to find inspiration. They live just to get through it. And they achieve and do great things in that time. But have they lived for themselves is the real question. And it seems selfish inherently, but the question is do you have enough life that you have left? Because you don't know when it comes, right? Do you have enough life left to not start living it for yourself? So now is the opportunity and the time to enjoy life. It's not grand gestures, it's not overt acts, it is simple beauty in the world. And taking the time and opportunity to appreciate it truly is the most peaceful, saving grace of this life, of this world, of our whole time being here. And just know that when you finally go into that dark night and the lights are out, that you will have done all that you can to live life between now and then. Much love to you, and thank you for being a beautiful and wonderful spiritual being.